Hello world, I'm Whitney Bandel and welcome to another video from my HTML and CSS course. In this video we will be looking at tables. So let's go ahead and open up our text editor. And for this file, we'll just go ahead and save it to the desktop. We're going to do File, Save As, and I'll do tables.html. And then we'll start this just like any other file. For the title, let's just do tables for now. We might change this. We'll add space to do embedded styles, just so we don't have to have multiple documents. I'm going to open up our page so we have the two next to each other. So tables are good when you need to organize a bunch of information, like a spreadsheet. They are made up of rows and columns. When you are creating a table, it's going to begin and end with the table tags. So if we go to our body section, you would just create a opening and end tag with table. And then how you organize your information is done by rows, and then you put cells of information into each row. So each row is going to begin with TR for table row, and then it'll end with TR. And then within each row, you'll have a cell, and that will be your table data. So I'm going to return, and then we'll do TD for table data. You can also have a table header. So a table header will have TH. So instead of having cells with data, instead we have TH. Whoops, need to have the forward slash. When you are creating headings, it's recommended that you also give your headings IDs, so that way it'll be easier to organize the information structurally. So for example, what this might look like is in our TH, we could add ID equals, and then we could call this name, and then add name. You would also then do the same later with your data that would be associated. Now, typically you would actually we'd probably actually have one row that would have our headers, and then we would probably have a row below it. And this row would have our data. So here we could have matching data, and here we would type in TD for our data, and then we would say headers equals name to associate it with the ID that is labeled name. And then you could put in your name, and then end your data. You can also use a couple of different attributes to change the cells of data. Let's actually save this and refresh. So right now we have two rows. Each one has just one cell, and then the top one is a header, so styled a little bit different than the data. So there are also some commonly used attributes for table data and header cell elements, and we'll take a look at that by starting a new table. So you can either just kind of move this down, or we can just delete it. It's just to kind of give us an idea. So we're going to create a table to our end tag. And then within our table, we're going to actually add a border. We're going to say border is equal to 1. So this way we'll actually be able to see how each of the cells is organizing the information. Then we're going to add our first row. I'm going to return this. And then we'll create our data. And the first attribute we want to look at is column span, which is written in the opening tag. And it's written as col span, and then we can say how many columns that we want that cell to span. So if we hit 2, what this means is rather than just going across a single cell, it's going to go across 2 cells worth of information. So we'll actually just type this in. This spans 2 columns. And then in order to really see this, we need to add some context. So we're going to create another row that will have a different style to it. This one will just have 2 regular cells. So we'll do TD. We'll say column 1. And then we'll do another one that will be column 2. So I'm going to hit save, refresh. So now we can see that we have this spans 2 columns, and then column 1 and column 2. We could also change this to, let's say, an H. So that way we could kind of take a look at it as being a header instead. We could make this look a little bit like what we had before, where we could actually go ahead and add back in the ID. So ID equals name. And then down here we could say headers equals name. And then maybe instead of saying this spans 2 columns, we could say name, first name, last name. So the ID we're not actually going to see, but it's going to help associate the information. So if somebody was using some sort of assistive technology or trying to style the information, or maybe even use some way of parsing through the information, they would know that the information in the data is related to the ID. And actually, we probably want to add this as well. So both of these will be associated with that name. So that's taking a look at column span. There's also row span. So what we would do with row span, let's do this in a separate table. We'll also add border equals 1. And I'm just going to go ahead and add the second one so we have our rows ready to work with. So first one we'll make our table data, and we'll say row span be equal to 2. Then I'll write this spans 2 rows. Then we'll add another data that will say row 1, column 2. We'll go down to our second row. And we'll do a single table data cell, and we'll say row 2, column 2. Hit save, refresh. So what's a little bit more tricky, I'm going to add a couple breaks. It's a little bit more tricky with the row span. If you kind of take a look at this, this first one is spanning the first 2 rows of information, and then as you are filling in information, it knows that the next cell is going to go to the right of it. And then when you start the second row, it knows based off of this row span 2 that this first cell's worth of information is already being taken up. So even though you're only putting in one data cell, it knows that it needs to go into this second location. So if you are maybe more visual like I am, I tend to kind of draw these things out ahead of time to help me think through the logic of how I need to organize my information. You can also add headers over here. So for example, maybe we don't want this to just be data. We could have this be a header. So when you are creating your tables, you could organize your information. So you have headers going across the top. You could have it so your headers are going across the side and stacking vertically. You could have both if you wanted. So we could have headers that go across one direction and then headers that go down. Maybe we have information that's kind of combining 2 bits of information and how they overlap when they're combined. That's kind of up to you. So you just want to think about the information that you have. Tables are something that you are going to need to include in your final project. So you do need to kind of think about what information you want to have and how you want to organize it. Another term that you should be familiar with is scope, which specifies the association of table cells and table row or column headers. So what we could write, say up here, we could add scope. We could say scope is equal to column, or we could say scope is equal to row. So it's just another way of specifying, are your headers going to be moving across the columns, or are they going to be moving across the rows? So if we were going to type in row instead, it would know that that information is going to be organized a different way. Table cells can have more than just text in them. You can include text, graphics, and other HTML elements. Before, we had more options with working with different types of elements in HTML. Designers would create fixed layouts, and a lot of times in order to make sure that everything lined up a certain way, people actually use tables quite frequently to actually organize their information into different rows and columns. That's something that you're not going to see as often now. Now we're using it more for data that makes sense to include in a table. But you can add more than just texts to your table information if you choose to. All right, so let's save this, and we're going to start a new file. Save this as schedule.html. For the title, let's call this class schedule. And let's leave room to add embedded styles. So we're going to kind of start similar to the last file, and technically you could use this to build off of if you really wanted to. I just don't want to interrupt any of your files that you might want to use later for notes. So I'm trying to keep everything sort of separate from each other. We're going to start this pretty similar. Let's start by adding a heading. And we'll end up changing this later. But we're going to do an H1 and we'll say classes. And what we're going to do is we're going to create your class schedule inside of a table. Now, usually when I'm teaching a class during the spring or fall semester, my students have typically fuller schedules. This might be the only class that you're taking over the summer. So if that's the case, I would suggest rather than doing your schedule right now, maybe picking your schedule from last semester or your fall semester if you're taking classes or if you're taking classes before, just so you have enough information that you kind of have something to actually fill out. If you only have this class, that's fine. You can kind of make up information as you go along. But that's kind of where we're headed, is just kind of creating your class schedule. So in that case, a lot of times I'll type in more than just classes, maybe say classes, summer 2019. So you could type in kind of the specifics of what schedule you're thinking of. And we'll do table. We'll add our first row. And this first row is going to have our heading, so we'll do TH, and we're going to say scope. It's going to be row. And then we'll just say class. And then we'll do another heading, and we'll say column span equals 2. We'll say scope equals row. Oh, and it looks like I forgot quote, and then meeting time, and then we'll end our row. We'll start our second row. Here we will put in our first data cell, which will say web 110. So you should have at least this class if you're doing this semester. Then we'll do TD row span 2. And this will give us a little bit of practice working with the column span, scope, and row span. Now, since this is an online class, this is going to be a little bit different. Typically, what I would do is, and what I'll probably do for this, just kind of create a placeholder. The last section I did was on Mondays. And then what I've done before is row span equals 2. Then last time I taught was 11:50 a.m. or 9 to 11:50 a.m. So what we could do is we could just say online, and then maybe instead of having the times, we could use the dates of the class. So we could do 6/3/2019 to 7/25/2019. And then after our second row, we will create a third row. And this one will say HTML and CSS. So we hit save. And it looks like I still have the last one, so we need to open up this file. And let's actually go back up to our table and add border equals 1. And before I hit save, this is kind of a good example of why we might want to have some sort of border, just because right now it's really hard to read this information and know what's being associated with what. So I'm just going to hit save, refresh, and now it's a little easier to read. You'll notice though that there's not a lot of space. You might have noticed that I usually harp a lot on padding and spacing and using enough white space. It's kind of a common mistake that people who are new to designing tend to overlook. We get really caught up in the content and the pictures, and we think less about the space between items. So I would say this looks pretty bad with the padding and the white space between it. So we'll take a look in a little while at how to kind of style this to make a little bit more sense, but we at least have our headings. This heading has the class information, so we have the actual kind of course number and then the title of the course, and then under these two columns, which are kind of grouped together, are the meeting times. So kind of the general broad meeting time and the specific. And again, what we would have had if this wasn't an online class would be the date would be under this column, and then we would have the time under this column. So we have this class summer 2019 at the top as a heading. There's actually a better way of creating a heading, and that is using a caption. So we're going to remove this H1. You could comment it out if you wanted to. And inside of the table, but before our first row, we'll add caption. We'll say classes summer 2019 or whatever you decided, and then we'll end. Hit save, refresh. And so again, structurally, this is going to make more sense. It's going to group this caption with the table and associate it structurally. And you'll notice that it's changed the default style as well. Again, I would say I'm not terribly fond of the spacing or the size of the font. We'll go back and we'll kind of modify it a little bit, make it easier to read. But structurally, this is a better way of actually adding a title essentially to your table. We have our headings. So up here we have our class and meeting time. And what we can do is give these IDs again. So we'll say ID equals class name. Forgot my beginning quote. This one will give an ID. We'll say meeting time. And then down here, we would need to add headers equals meeting time. Up here, I need to do headers equals class name. Headers equals meeting time. And then this is the class name. Headers equals class name. So visually that's not changing anything, but behind the scenes it's giving important structural information to our table. Okay, so now we're going to add some styles to the top. I'm going to leave this for a second so that way if you need to look over anything before I scroll up, you have a chance to double check you have everything. Okay, so now we're going to go up to style and we're going to add table style. We're going to do TD TH style. We're going to add caption style. And that's all we're going to start with. We might change a few things after that. So starting with table, we're going to add margin, do auto. We're going to add a border, 5 pixels, solid. And I would say it's going to be better to actually do your border rather than in the HTML here to do your borders in your CSS. So we'll probably end up changing this. I'm going to have us go ahead and finish typing this though. We'll do width. I'm going to say 600 pixels. Up here we're going to do border. Say 1 pixel solid. We're going to add some padding to make it easier to read. And change the font family to something that's not a serif font. So we're going to do Arial and then sans serif. Caption font family Verdana sans serif. Font weight bold to make it stand out a little bit. Font size do 1.2M because it's a little bit small the way it is right now. And we're going to add some padding, but we're going to leave it on the bottom just because mostly the problem is that we just need more space between it and the table. So let's hit save and we'll refresh. And we can actually remove the border from our table now, since our borders are being done up here in our CSS. And there's a couple of ways that we can play around with the data cells. Right now we have a border around the whole table, we have borders around the cells. We could also play around with doing colors instead to kind of differentiate the different cells. This is going to be pretty similar to what your textbook is going to have you do as well. So we're going to actually change the border on our TDTH, and we're going to change the border and we're going to say border style none. So it's again going to be a little bit harder to read at this moment just because we're not going to have anything. And then we're going to create a new class, and this is going to be called alt row, and we're going to say background color. It's going to be equal to CCCC33. And once we have this class, we need to then go in and say which one of these we want to be attributed to that. So we go to our rows and we start with the first, and we'll do class equals alt row. Then we'll skip our second one, go to our third, and do class equals alt row. Save and refresh. So what's going to mess this up a little bit is the fact that we have some of our information spanning across 2 columns, which is fine, but it's where it starts spanning across 2 rows where things get a little bit sloppy, where technically this information is being associated with the second row instead of the third one. So this would actually be where we might want to remove or kind of consolidate the information. Maybe we don't actually need HTML and CSS to be a separate row. It could join the one above it. All right, so before we completely abandon this, let's try to try this out a little bit. I'm going to have us go and add a few more styles. So let's add a TH specific style after our TD, TH. Here we'll do background color. We'll do 0099cc. And then we'll also add color white to it. We'll remove this class, and so if you wanted to, you could go ahead and you could remove it from your HTML as well. So here we'll have two different styles. We'll do a tr inth of type. We'll say even. We'll do background color CC33. Border style none. And then we'll do tr inth of type. We'll do odd. So alternate between these background color 99CCFF. Border style none. And to make this work better, we're going to remove our column span. And instead we'll have TD headers equals meeting time. We'll have our meeting, and then again we'll remove this one as well. TD. I need to remove this TD headers, meeting time. That should all be fine. And then we'll remove our third row. Just gonna hit save, refresh. So this looks a lot better. I'm trying to go with a color palette that looks kind of like Johnson County Community College's color scheme. So we have our colors for the top heading, and then we have our rows. So to actually see this, we need to start filling out more of your schedule. So let's actually add another row. You could copy this, just paste it. And even if you, again, if you don't have another class, you could just use the same information. Let's copy it a couple times, hit save, refresh. So now we can actually see that every other row is going to be, so our even row, this is going to be the color that we used before. So that's going to be that green color. So every even row is going to be this green, and the other rows are going to be blue. So I would, to just kind of practice with this, I was just filling in the rest of your schedule. So I might do, it's based off of last semester. Oh, and it looks like I accidentally removed the CSS from this. So just so you have an example, a schedule for a non-online class might look like this. So digital video tools, Web 125, Friday 11 a.m. to 2:50 p.m. We still have it separated so that way you could kind of tell the difference. If you wanted to, you could have this in the same column. I think it makes it a little bit easier to read this way, but it's kind of up to you. Under Canvas, I have a couple of different links that we can look at. So there's this link to pseudo classes, and this will be a great resource for you to be able to see what other classes there are. Your textbook is going to cover some as well. So here we have our anchor pseudo classes. These are ones that we've kind of looked at before. So just a anchor link color, links that you've visited, hovering. So if you're using your mouse, you're hovering over top of it. If the link has been selected, so the active color. And you could look at these and try them out for yourself. Here we also have the ability to change something based off if you are hovering over a div element. This one's kind of fun. Hover over a div element to show a P element like a tooltip. So if we hover over this, it's popping up another element. And you can use this to create like drop-down menus if you wanted to. There's a lot that you can do with pseudo classes. Here we have the first child. Pseudo class matches a specified element that is the first child of another element. And then at the very bottom, we have this list of all sorts of different types. So checked, so selects every checked input element, input disabled. Here's some other ones that are kind of helpful. First letter, that could be a good way of letting you style something like a magazine might, where you have the first letter in a paragraph a lot larger, maybe styled differently so it stands out. There are a couple of other ways that we can configure our table into different sections. There is T-head, which is used to designate the table header. There's T-body, which is used to designate the body section. So it's very similar to the semantic HTML elements that we've been using up until now, but just specifically for tables. And then there's T-foot, which is like a footer for your tables. And your textbook has a really great example. We're going to use what we have and kind of modify it to look similar to the example from your textbook, so we kind of have a nice transition into that idea. So we're going to start with our HTML, and in our top section here, we're going to add a third heading. I'm going to say TH ID equals credits. Scope equals row credits. And then to each of these, we'll want to add table data that will be associated with credits. And then you'll just put in however many credits each of your classes would be worth. So I'm just going to copy this to each. Hit save for now. So we have this other column, so we could keep track of, are you part-time enrolled? Are you enrolled part-time? Are you enrolled full-time? How many credits do you have? And to kind of get the full benefit of this, we're also going to need to separate our information into the heading, body, and footer. So we'll take this first row, and I'm going to add a little bit of space between these to make them a little easier to see. So this first group, we're going to put in the T head section. And then the rest of our schedule is going to go in the T body. We'll just go ahead and put all of our classes into T body. We'll create a new T foot. And in our T foot, we'll create a new T row. With 2 data cells. And we'll say TD headers equals class name column span 3, and we'll just say total technically this doesn't necessarily need to be associated with the class name. Really, this is kind of its own separate category, but it'll work for what we're doing. Do our second, and here we'll associate this one though with headers equals credits, and this one will make more sense to be associated with that. And we'll say for mine it'll just be 12. Hit save, refresh. So here we have our classes, and then we have a total, and we're totaling up how many credits that we have. And we're going to change the styles, like I said, to match the styles of the example from your textbook. I think it actually does a really good job to match the content and how to make it easier to read. So we'll take a look at the choices they make and kind of explain why I think they are good decisions. So what they have for their styles, and I think I'm just going to have us go ahead. If you want to keep this as a copy, I would suggest maybe saving a new version of this to work with, because I'm going to remove all of these styles. You could also, alternatively, we could comment these out. So I could comment these out, so that way if you still want a record of them, you could do that. And then below, I'll just add in the new styles. You can kind of toggle between them if you want to try them out. So we'll do table, TH and TD will all have a border style of none. Then we'll have a caption, which will be font, family, Verdana, sans serif. So that looks like it'll stay the same. Font, weight, bold, font size, 1.2 M, padding, bottom 5 pixels, and then we'll do our head section, our T head, background, color, color will be white, background color 0099cc. T body font family Arial sans serif. So that'll be the same. We'll do font size 0.90 em. But we could just do 0.9. T foot. We'll add background color 0099cc. We're going to be removing our pseudo classes, so we're no longer going to have that even odd colors. Everything's going to be styled the same. We'll do color white, font weight, bold, text align center. Hit save, refresh. And I forgot, we want to have one more style. Let's add this after our T body. There's going to be T body TD, and then we'll say border bottom 1 pixel dashed 006666, padding left 25 pixels. So I'm going to hit save, refresh. Alright, that looks a lot better already. Okay, so why I like these styles is it's another way of showing how you can make it easier for people to read. So we've looked at having a border that goes all the way around a data cell. We've looked at alternating colors to make bands to make it easier to read. And then this is using a bottom border to essentially underline. You might have seen this being used before in like a index or table of contents where there might be an underline or kind of dots that help lead your eye across, but it makes it a lot easier for people to be able to read information. So I think this is another clever way of handling how to help people read information a little bit better. I would actually even suggest having maybe a little bit more padding just around the text in general too. But I also like the color scheme, having colors that are similar on top and bottom to also help kind of sandwich the information so that way you understand what's the information at the very top, what's on the bottom, kind of helping people get to the information, kind of maybe what's most important. So I think this ends up making it a lot easier to read, especially in this case. This would be really helpful, for example, if you were trying to do maybe a menu and you wanted to easily scan information like prices, or if you wanted to kind of total up information. I think the textbook example might be for a menu. I don't quite remember what exactly it looked at, but I think this is a nice example to be able to practice working with the T head, T body, and then T foot as a way of organizing information, kind of looking at why you might want to use a heading and a footer. Alright, so this is going to be everything we're going to cover for tables.